Hey there guys, my name's Henry. Welcome to Xbox On, where we've got a very special video and a special guest because we've got Abubakar Salim, who is here from Surgent Studios to talk all things about Tales of Kenzera, ZAU, which is your upcoming game, a debut game as well.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us.
Terrifying and also exciting at the same time.
Well, we've got lots to cover. We're going to talk about the journey itself of making a game. We're going to talk about how you've come to some of the decisions in terms of designing it. We're also going to cover what sort of fun abilities we're going to get and when and where people can actually play the game as well. So let's get into it. So this being your debut game, a brand new studio, how would you describe it to people out there who are looking to learn more about Tales of Kenzera and wanting to dive into it?
Yeah, I think it's an expression and a sort of journey of grief. I think, but not in the way that it would be as sort of as a negative, more of a sense of kind of like an exploration of it, I feel. I think that's kind of what the game sort of encompasses. It's this exploration of the journey of grief as you go along. I think, from what you see is essentially this young kid, this young shaman who, after losing his father, makes a deal with the god of death, Kunga, that in exchange for the three great spirits that roam the land of Kenzera, that he will bring his father back. It's very inspired by sort of African mythology, Bantu mythology, but also playing, from a lot of the stories that my dad would tell me as when I was growing up as well. So yeah, it's really an exploration of what grief actually is or means. Well, from my perspective anyway, from my journey of it as a whole.
It feels like quite a brave, very heavy topic to approach for like a first game
I know.
that you're putting out, and you're like, hey
Should've
guys,
just made,
come
like,
check out
Tetris design.
it's our fun new studio. We're going to talk about grief.
Yeah.
But why did it feel like that was the right call?
I think I'm a big believer of you got to write what you know. I think my acting background has really sort of pulled into the space of looking into what rather than going down a route which feels either safe or fantastical, you've got to pull from a place of truth. Especially, I'm of the mentality of, if you've only got one chance to kind of do something, to try and do it as honestly and truthful as possible.
And with ZAU as a character in particular, you're injecting some of your own history into how this character has been formed. And you say he's like this young kid who is taking on quite an intense trial, I suppose, to overcome death in a way and bring back some of his family to be able to enjoy that and rejoice in that again. And how much of that do you have to draw from within and also from other members in your team, I suppose?
Yeah,
it's not a one-man job
for sure. No, absolutely no. And I think like that's the thing about this whole process. We've all had to be quite vulnerable and honest and open with one another in order to kind of deliver what we feel is this closest and strongest experience that we can to people, right? It's important to do that, and I think one of the biggest, obstacles and challenges has been, how far do we go? How much do we reveal of ourselves? Because at the end of the day, right, we're there to work, we're there to make games, we're there to create a fun experience, but at the same time, we're also there to deliver something that's really honest and really truthful and something that we're all proud of. And I think really the only way you can do that is by building a space that you feel safe in, that you feel that you're able to express and share. Because at the end of the day, games are art, right? It's an art form, and it's another way of taking in an art. And I think you have to be expressive and open and go into places that you might not necessarily feel comfortable about, but you feel safe to do so in order to bring that art forward.
I suppose I'd want to know a bit about why in particular an action platformer, sort of Metroidvania, why did that feel like that's the connective tissue to bring this story together with how you want them to experience it?
Yeah, I think it's so there's a couple of things to take into mind there. I think the Metroidvania element aspect for it, for example, to me is basically grief, right? I mean, the idea of it, or the formula of it, is you throw a character into the middle of a space they have no idea about. They're trying to learn as much as they can in this terrifying space. it has provided all the tools for you to conquer it, but it takes time for you to do that, right? You have to get used to it, accustomed to it. And that's essentially grief, right? Grief comes at you at a time when you don't necessarily realize or could plan for. You're thrown into the middle of this space or this thing that you have no idea what it is or how to control it. It's got a name, but you still it's going to be completely unique to you. It gives you all the tools in order to kind of deal with it, the sadness, the anger, the sort of almost weird relief that you kind of feel from it. But you're still trying to gauge an idea of how I'm going to use this stuff, you know? And I think that's why, you know, it had to be a Metroidvania. It had to be that kind of side-scroller platformer to a degree. The element of the platformer aspect of it is really kind of paying homage to the games that I used to play with my dad. You know, my earliest memories really are playing Sonic, and really that sort of made sense to me to kind of go down that route as well. I think, again, one of the key things that we really wanted to do when building this game was everything had to have a reason and had to have a purpose. Because, again, keep in mind, this is the first time we're doing something, first time diving into it. Might as well drive it from a place that feels honest and with a purpose, rather than doing it for the sake of just doing it, you know?
It feels like the level design in particular is always a fun way to tackle player progression.
Yeah.
Because you start off with, you know, your basic tools. I mean, in Tales of Kenzera, not normally the case, because you start off with abilities and powers, and players are supposed to, I suppose, take for granted that, yes, you are a shaman. You have these two masks that you've inherited from your father that can give you these incredible powers, and you're performing the dance to, you know, wield both the sun and the moon at the same time. And it's cool to start off with a lot of power in a Metroidvania. That's not usual. So I like the way that the game already sets a different tone and subverts the genre by saying it's going to be more than that.
Yeah.
But then also, I think you mentioned that grief is quite a scary place to be in. But then the game itself is actually gorgeous. It's so lush and full of color, and there's incredible ambience in the sound effects, and it makes you want to get absorbed in it. So how did you arrive at contrasting that then? Because you've got the theme of grief, but then also a level and a world which is just rich with color.
No, that's great. Because that's exactly what we kind of wanted to capture. I think one of the biggest sort of realizations I had after my father passed away was that the world continued to spin. And I think that the reality of that, you know, everything still is as colorful, as kind of everyone's moving on, doing their jobs, that kind of thing. Like, the world just continues to spin. However, from my perspective, it's kind of gone helter-skelter. I kind of see it as like, almost like everything just turned vivid and kind of intense. And I think that is where that inspiration to you know, yes, the world is beautiful and it's gorgeous, but from ZAU's perspective, there's only one goal here, which is to bring his father back, you know? And I think that's something that I wanted to really capture within this experiencing game, because from the external perspective, especially from the player, you're playing in this gorgeous and beautiful world, and you can see that, but you are playing a grieving child. And I think that is, you know, let ZAU do that as well. Let them go on the journey, so then you can hear that too. And that contrast, I think, plays really well in that. So yeah, it was important to capture not only like the beauty of all these different cultures that have inspired us to kind of tell these stories, but also to capture that sense of like, this is the reality kind of grief. The world is beautiful, but also has its dangers. In a way, grief kind of is like that. It's messy. You know, there is a sense of moving forward, but also feeling like you're stilted. And that was, again, something that we really wanted to capture with the art and the world, and even the story as a whole. You know, we've got comedy in there, which you don't necessarily have a lot of the time, except if it's dark humor, right? But that's, again, that's part of that journey of grief. It isn't just one note, it's multiple, it's complex. And I think part of that being that the world is still as beautiful as it is, but you're still on your own journey.
I love the humor in the game, actually, because it feels like, yes, you're reminded that your one path, your one journey, your mission is to do something that seems impossible, improbable, especially for a kid who's so young and is shouldering so much. And yet you have Kunga on the other side of it, who is bringing ZAU sort of back to earth a bit, but I find it really fascinating that we get this image of the god of death, and the first thing you think of when you think that is, this is a foe I need to vanquish. Any other game, you're going out there and he's the end boss, and you've got a mad
typical
bullet
Hades
hell
kind of
level,
vibe, right?
exactly. And but in ZAU, it's a totally different narrative.
Yeah,
Kunga felt when I was playing the demo that he was the one that was really looking out for me.
Yeah,
and he had care and consideration, and was reminding me of how grave this journey is. You have to realize the consequences if it goes wrong, but also to remember who you are, and to ground yourself, and remember, take things slower, or to respect the environment around you, because it's a journey you're going on, but this is not necessarily the right way to do things. It's not the wrong way to do things. He felt like a really nice guiding voice, which was something different for me to experience from the god of death.
Well, this is it, right? And it's different perspectives. Like, death in a lot of cultures, especially within Africa, isn't necessarily seen as the end. Neither is it seen as this negative. It's almost like, in a way, it's a celebration, a passing. And I think that's something that we really wanted to, push forward with this. It's, Kunga is, funnily enough, not only an individual being, but also a place. So it's a bit like Hades, right? I think for us, it was just really important to capture that, to be, again, honest to the perspective of what death means. It is sad to ZAU, right? It's the loss of his father, but he has the hope of bringing him back. It's like that's a possibility, and I'm going to talk to death about it. So that's essentially the journey that you go on with these characters, and what is beautiful as well about most of the Bantu myths is these crazy kind of otherworldly feats are kind of like casual conversation, like, yeah, we're going to do this. And you kind of go with it. And I think there's a magic in that,
Yeah, it reminds me of how youthful he is, I suppose, because even in the sort of avatars that you've designed for when their dialogue options pop up and you're hearing them have their conversations, it reminds me of just how young ZAU is as a character, because they are so emotive, the avatars that you designed in particular. What were the inspirations to have that sort of contrasting element? Because the game world itself, vibrant, lush, obviously it's sort of 2.5D/3D because you're in that world, but then those avatars as well, was it sort of like a joint decision, or was that a parallel track to get everything designed the same way?
It was actually really as an incentive. Well, there's two things, right? There's budget, right? There's that element, but that kind of restriction or limitation brought us into the mentality of thinking, okay, because this is a story within a story, right? It's Zuberi who's actually, reading the story of ZAU, and you're going through this journey with Zuberi. It's from what does he see in his perspective, essentially, of how these characters engage and talk with one another. Zuberi's into comics. He's kind of into that kind of fantasy sort of element, and again, he's a typical teenage kid, right? So when he sees these conversations between these two characters playing through elements of that, it's also through his perspective. Who's to, I think one of the the sort of the special beam cannon kind of thing that the blue mask, the moon mask can do. Really, whether that is actually the moon mask's sort of actual special ability, it doesn't matter. It's through Zuberi's perspective as how he imagines that's how ZAU goes on this journey with these two masks. It's again, it's like your reading of, let's say, for example, Lord of the Rings may be very different to my reading. And I think that's what we wanted to lean into.
What are the other outside influences that have really played into making this game? I'm sure there's countless,
there's a few, but I'd say, like, from the top of my mind, like Ori really kind of inspired me, especially Blind Forest. I think that really captured this element of loss and being and feeling lost. I'd say Hades is a big one too, in regards to like just it's the simple journey of a character and what their objective to get to something. It feels so human and grounded in some form of human truth, even though it's set in this fantastical area and element in space. I'd also say, again, like a lot of this, there's a book called Indaba, My Children, which is written by this sort of Sangoma in South Africa, and the stories that he shares is really, really cool, and that kind of inspired a lot of the sort of stories and elements of the game as a whole. But yeah, pulled from a lot, man. Like, and again, just personal experiences. I think kind of the journeys and stuff that we've also enjoyed as kids, as a studio, our sort of memories of our parents as well, and what we played with them as well. Like, we've kind of pulled from a lot of places and sources ultimately.
I really found myself quite impressed in particular about, whilst playing the demo, the waterfall. Because you set the tone straight away saying, do this to dash through a waterfall. I was like, cool, I get waterfalls now. And I thought that's where that ends. Right. But then obviously very soon after you learn that, no, waterfalls can actually be turned into something else, something traversable, a wall or a slide or anything that you'd like it to become. And I love the fact that you are all so quickly able to subvert the expectations of not everything in this world is going to be what it first appears. You're going to learn about it slowly and pick up pieces here and there. And that will inform the rest of your experience with the game. So I'm excited to see what the rest of it looks like. But out of all the abilities in the game, do you have like one particular favorite that you're like, this is the one?
Pulse. There's a pulse ability which you kind of get it kind of midway through. I think the journey of getting it is really awesome, and also just the story behind it, but also the effects it has, and the thing as well that we've kind of laced within the game that we've not necessarily revealed, not that we reveal it to players, is every ability has like a secret thing about them that works in tandem with, to a degree with one another. And I think like that is something, again, that we were really, there's basically, put it this way, there's a really cool thing about Pulse where if you do it at the right time, at the right moment in certain areas and elements, be it boss fights or, be it in combat, it's really cool.
I'm gonna have to remember that. I'm gonna have to look out for it as well. Nothing happens when I do it. I'm like, I did it wrong.
Gotta play it again.
Yeah, exactly. So we've had the narrative as key, and that sort of North Star, like you mentioned. We've got the gameplay elements, being Metroidvania genre. The art style, absolutely gorgeous. But then the other sort of piece of the puzzle I tend to think of when it comes to game dev is the audio and the sound space that it works in. So how did you find the right creative choices to match and marry the audio that you designed with everything else that's going on?
I mean,
impact and oomph.
So I mean, like if we look at the music, for example, like that was a really important aspect to me, and to sort of the building of this game. Working with Manita Desai, who's this incredible composer, she went in, like really truly went in on the music, full orchestra, that kind of vibe, choir as well, like really authentic as well, and pulling from authentic instruments as well as from players as well. And the beauty of matching that with the sort of technical brilliance of Rob Brown, who's our technical audio sort of lead, he matching them both in capturing what we wanted to create, which is this kind of clash of not necessarily culture, but if you look at it this way, the ZAU's sort of space and the journey that ZAU's going through is this fantastical land, but then Zuberi is also going through a similar journey, but it's set kind of in the modern day in a way. That kind of clash, even though they are both on the same journey, they're both coming at it from different perspectives. So sometimes the music will clash with one another, but then at the same time, sometimes they work with one another, and it's really, really cool. It's almost capturing that, almost like Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse-esque kind of track. So it's really trying to marry it. It comes from a place of, again, looking into the traditional roots and kind of playing from there and finding that rhythm, but also finding that rhythm within the combat of and the enemies and where that comes through as well, and trying to sing everything to this rhythm, this kind of internal beat, this driving beat that pushes the game forward, because ultimately that's the only way you can go, especially when you are on a journey of grief. There's no, even the steps that you feel are backwards aren't necessarily backwards. It's going towards that same destination, which is trying to get you comfortable with the idea of where you're at the moment. And I think that really was infused in how we looked at the sound design and playing into that as a whole.
If you've got all those pieces of the puzzle locked in, the last thing I'm supposed to do is find a voice to tell it through as well. And obviously you've had a lot of experience with acting, with voice acting. That's like bread and butter for you. So do you really get stuck into helping direct how.
Yeah,
the
I
performers are.
directed the whole piece, as well as, I mean, again, you could put it down to budget, but no, yeah,
But you know what you're talking about.
yeah,
so
but
that
exactly,
helps.
but this
Yeah.
is the thing. So yeah, I did the directing, I did the casting as well, and really, truly, a lot of the people that I pulled actually into it, some have been great friends for many years who've kind of known me, during the time that my father had passed, but also at the same time, friends who I, made new just on the journey of what we've gone through. And I think, like, to me, the cast are incredible storytellers in regards to that front. And I think that's why I was really excited to work with them. I mean, the fact that we've got like Steve Toussaint, who plays, my dad in House of the Dragon, like being in this, it's incredible. Like, it's so nuts. So it's like having that opportunity to work with him again in a different context has been really cool.
It all sounded like it all flowed quite well together, all those aspects of designing the game, but we all know that game dev's not quite that simple. So were there any particular moments where you thought, oh, we'd like this to work, but it's maybe
The whole process,
or
whole process, like literally. No, it was like, especially as we were starting as the first game as a studio, the building of the company, oh man, where do I begin? Like, honestly, there has always been some form of hiccup or something that just doesn't work, a bug that's crept up that just has no solution to it. Things that are bugs but make the game feel great that you keep in, which is an element of pulse, which is what I mentioned earlier. Like, I think, like, for us, we began this game with the idea of having 3 masks. You're supposed to have 3 masks that you switched, between, right? LB and RB, you could switch between these 3 masks at a fly, right? We realized essentially as we were kind of going through game dev that this just isn't working. It was fun, it worked to a degree, but it just wasn't capturing that part of the flow. You have designed all these elements in the world to these 3 masks that you've kind of solidly gone down this path on. So then you have to make the decision of, all right, do we keep going for this at the detriment of essentially player experience? It works, but but it's not necessarily the right experience we want to deliver. Do we keep it, or do we cut it? Do we cut one mask and essentially, ensure that and rebuild a lot of what the experience was going to be, but knowing full well that actually it might work better for the whole of the process. Being a small team, that's a mighty big ask.
Yeah,
but again, this is it. But at the same time, you've got to think, okay, it's about the experience you want to deliver, right? And that even comes down to enemies. Like, I think we had actually designed like 36 different variant types of enemies.
Oh god!
It was like truly we had it all covered. We had it all the idea. But again, you're wrestling with time. You're wrestling with like the people that you have on your team. You're wrestling with so many of these different elements that you have to make rough decisions that kind of are not necessarily taken into account when people play.
I suppose I've never made a game, but with Metroidvanias, you probably have to pace the sort of addition of new abilities out. Like you realize what your end goal is, and you're working your way back. You've got this map that you intend for players to journey through basically every corner of it, but how are you going to get them to retrace steps with new abilities? And that must just be tough on its own, almost storyboarding the mechanics side of it and then overlaying the narrative side of it for it to make sense. Like, why have you just got this ability? Why is it important? Why should we take a moment to think about why you've just gotten that and now how it's useful to the rest of the world? So,
and I think that's why you've got to decide what is important to you at the moment. And I think, like, for us, it was about delivering and conveying the story. So you have the story kind of drive that pacing. In some games, it's the abilities, and how you kind of get those abilities and what you do with those abilities. Sometimes it's the map. And it's about, really trying to open this world to you to play in. You find what your North Star is and you go with that. And I think, like, for us, it was about conveying the story, this kind of world to a degree through these characters' shoes, in a way.
Got a lot of fun abilities to use, but Who's your favorite enemy to unleash them on?
Probably the it's like we call him in the studio the elite Rungu Warrior, which is essentially the Roho ya Rungu, which is the spirit of the Rungu. It's the big bad that you kind of meet in the waterfall area, which is shielded, and you have to
that
kind
guy.
of So when I'll warn players in advance, they're definitely a lot tougher in the final game than they are now. So yeah, they are definitely a challenge, but they allow you also to play with the arsenal of what you have. Fully, truly. You know, we didn't want to make enemies kind of these sponges a lot of the time, but we needed one, and that's one. So, but it's brutal but fun to play. You know,
I love that. Not that it's like the training dummy effect, but sometimes you want an enemy that I can just unleash a bit on, or have a bit of fun with, or even just toy with them.
Exactly.
Like, I've got all these cool abilities. Let me swap masks for a sec and just.
That's it, and that's something that we really wanted to strive for with this guy. So yeah.
So having heard all that, when can players actually get hands on with it themselves for launch day?
Yeah. So I mean, really, the game launches April 23rd of this year, which feels like it's around the corner, which is it's terrifying.
Fast approaching.
Oh my god. But you know, we've got these. You can essentially pre-order it. You can pre-order now, and you get a cool comic, which kind of gives you a bit more context in regards to the actual world you're diving into. Some shaman points, which essentially makes the game not necessarily easier, just gives you that tiny bit of a leg up.
Yeah. So whilst players are waiting to get actually hands-on ahead of launch day, is there anything you could recommend that they could be doing in the meantime that sort of would prepare them to play this game, whether it's from film, literature, anything? Yeah,
I think the have a crack at reading Inda by My Children. I think that book is really cool because it is just exploring all these different myths and mythologies, which are brilliant if you want to kind of dive into that world and aspect of it all. I'd say, you know, listening to sort of Amapiano or that kind of like that kind of music is pretty dope and great to listen to. Just get into the vibe of it. You know, get ready for it, because I think that's the world you're going to be jumping into, and I think by kind of exposing yourself to this, to the music, but also to the kind of literature, it allows you to come into this world feeling almost like, oh, okay, I kind of got an idea in a sense of what I'm going to be expecting.
Now that you're inching closer to launch day, do you have any advice for burgeoning indie studios or someone who's thinking of making their first game?
Don't do it! It's terrible! No. Just stick to finding your voice and trust your own voice. I think it's very easy to try and chase the zeitgeist, or try and be like, oh, you know, this did really well here, we should do it that way. It's like, I think actually that's the wrong way of approaching something, especially because you have these limitations of, be it budget or time or people. You just need to be honest and trust your vision.
I already know that this is something really special, and it's
instantly
something I've never experienced before as well.
That's
which
good.
Makes me want to see more of it.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to get hands on.
And that's the thing, like, to me, this isn't like, you know, we don't own African mythology. Like, now that's Surgent Studios. No, it's like, this is opening the door to different perspectives and different stories. I've always said this. I've always said, like, you know, Filipino mythology is nuts. It's so cool though. It's like incredible, and there's so much to take from it. And I think like, and to explore, and I feel like that's, if this does anything to sort of inspiring more people to share their stories and different perspectives, then that's a job done. You know, I feel like that's really the like, you know, a big goal is to be like, hey, this is cool, you should dive more into this stuff. Put it this way, right? As soon as I heard Master Chief was in New Mombasa, like, being Kenyan myself, classic. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, that's the kind of vibe where I'm like, oh wow, I feel seen.
I feel that, yeah. There's a whole, like, so many other pantheons that
there's so
are waiting
many
to be explored.
This is it. And so many other stories to be told. And I think that's truly what it is. It's perspectives and stories. oh yeah, even actually talking about like, you know, again, I just remember, I think it's Halo 3 where, you know, they mentioned like, oh yeah, you're in the base of New Mombasa. And it's like, I remember even telling my dad, like, they're in Mombasa, man. Yeah, it's nuts.
Well, roll on April 23rd. I cannot wait to get hands-on with it. And if you guys love the look of it, make sure you check out the pre-order info. We'll leave it in the description so you can check it out and get some of those little bonuses. Thank you so much again for joining me. This has been awesome to talk about the game. If you want to hear more about it, make sure you drop a like as well as subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our future videos, as well as any coverage on Tales of Kenzera ZAU. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.